Hi, I'm Lydia Rackham, and I'm doing a study of prayers in the Bible. We're just working through them, studying them, seeing what we can learn from these prayers. I know we've been working through Genesis, and we haven't even gotten to Joseph yet. But I wanted to skip ahead and into First Samuel because I have been thinking about this prayer and thinking about how it has I've heard teachings on this prayer and this situation, and I believe that sometimes it's been taught wrongly, not taking the entire story into account, but only looking at the prayer part of it, which I think is a mistake. When I was an English major in college, and I was just talking to my mom is having fun auditing a college class. It's a history of Europe. And I think sometimes she's surprised at how much I know about history of Europe and things like this. But I've told her being an English major is almost like also being a history major because you have to understand the context in which things were written. You can't just pull, if you're studying it correctly, you can't just pull a, a story out of its cultural and historical context and understand it. Like if you were trying to just read anything by Charles Dickens, you have to understand when he lived, what motivated him, what his personal history was, all of that jazz. Who was the monarch at the time? What was the social situation? What was his particular reasoning for writing this or that? And so I've always been very interested in context and also putting yourself in the situation rather than judging from a large distance. Anybody can do that. Anybody can look at somebody from hundreds of years ago and say, well, who wouldn't have done that? Well, yeah, right. Actually, I bet you would have. Like if we put you in that situation, that very situation with those background and the way those people grew up, I bet you would have reacted the exact same way they did. Nobody likes to think of that. Everybody likes to think that they're so much smarter than people in the past. But we're not. We're the same. Humans don't change. We just change our clothes. So anyway, I think that a big thing of Hannah has been taken out of context. So first I'm just going to read it. So this is First Samuel. It's right after Ruth, and it's the end of the Judges times. So this is Samuel 1. Okay. So there was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zephite, from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. They were bad, by the way. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife, Peninnah, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. And because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her until she wept and would not eat. Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? Once when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. In bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, "How long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine." "Not so, my lord," Hannah replied. "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." Eli answered, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." She said, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Early the next morning, they arose and worshipped before the Lord and went back to their home at Ramah. Elkanah lay with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him." And then a little bit down here, Elkanah says, "I'm going back up." Like when it's probably the next year. He's like, "I'm going back to Shiloh as usual to do the sacrifice." And she's like, "No, I'm going to stay here and wean my baby. And then when he's big enough, then I will take him to the Lord and he will stay there." And so Elkanah says, "Good. That's fine with me." And then she took him up there and brought a sacrifice, and then she met Eli again, which is cool. And she said, "As surely as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." And he worshiped the Lord there, Samuel. And then she does a cool prayer. And she says, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Do not keep talking so proudly, or let your mouth speak such arrogance, for the Lord is a God who knows, and by him deeds are weighed. The bows of the warriors are broken, but those who stumbled are armed with strength. Those who were full hire themselves out for food, but those who are hungry hunger no more. She who is barren has borne 7 children, but she who has had many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. Upon them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his saints, but the wicked will be silenced in darkness. It is not by strength that one prevails. Those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. He will thunder against them from heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. So they went home then, and Samuel stayed, and he was probably only 3 years old. Ooh. And then, just to skip a little bit, they kind of go into the icky Hophni and Phinehas. Those are bad guys. But so his mom, Hannah, brings him a little robe every year. She makes a little robe for him and takes him. So she sees him once a year. Cool. At least she gets to see him. And then Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife, saying, "May the Lord give you children by this woman and take the place of the one she prayed for and gave to the Lord." Then they would go home. And the Lord was gracious to Hannah, and she conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord. So, okay. The way I have heard this taught, and I think it honestly fouled me up, and I'm sure it fouls other people up too. Because as it's taught, it is a hard teaching. And here's what I've heard. I have heard, so they look at Hannah's prayer, the early one, not the second one, but the first one, how she vows to give Samuel to the Lord if God will answer her prayer. And the way that I hear this taught is that God was waiting for her to give up that which she prayed for, to surrender everything to him before he would answer the prayer. That he wanted her to get to such a sense of absolute desperation that she gave up the very thing that she was asking for, that she surrendered it all to him. Therefore, saying that unless you are in that absolutely desperate state, and unless you are willing fully and completely to sacrifice the thing that you're asking for, sacrifice it. Not just dedicate it, but sacrifice it, meaning you don't get to keep, like Hannah didn't really get to enjoy Samuel. She had him for 3 years, and then she got to see him once a year until she died. That's not really having a son. So you have to be willing to be like that with whatever it is that you're praying for before God will answer you. That sounds hard, doesn't it? That sounds like a hard, I don't know. There's an aspect of that sounds mean. I don't. Do you know what I mean? I mean, are you? You know what I mean? Like, it sounds mean. But I think that teaching only looks at what's coming out of her mouth in that particular time, and not looking at the context. So let's go back. At this time in the world, although prayers could be heard throughout the land of Israel by God, obviously that was the case. If you shouted out to God, he can hear, he's not deaf. But the presence of the Lord was centered around the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. So the Ark of the Covenant was within the Holy of Holies, behind the curtain, in the tabernacle. So the only people who could enter the presence of the Lord were the high priest, who'd been sanctified and sanctified and sanctified and sanctified and atoned for, and all this blood and all that, and all the incense and everything. He could go in there and burn incense in the presence of the Lord and stuff like that in the actual Holy of Holies. So regular folks, if they wanted to draw near to the Lord, they had to do that at the tabernacle, because this is before the temple was built. Obviously, this is before David. So they just had that tent that they had built in the wilderness that Moses had constructed. So it's a great big tent with a courtyard and everything like that. And people were required to, this says year after year. So according to Leviticus, the men were supposed to come 3 times a year. Yeah, it says it right here. Oh my gosh. I feel like I'm ready to start my lighting. I'm just studying this myself. I'm learning about the festivals of the Lord, and there's 7 of them, and 3 of them are holy convocations that the Lord, you are supposed to come. So I guess Hannah got to see him 3 times a year. But that's still not very much. He would really grow a foot in between each time. But 3 times a year, every Israelite male was required to appear before the Lord at the central sanctuary. The festival was referred to here as probably the Feast of Tabernacles, which not only commemorated God's care for his people during the desert journey to Canaan. So the Sukkot, which is in the fall, that's where they would build the booths and live outside and remember their journeying in the wilderness after they were freed. So, and there each one has sacrifices that you're supposed to do and different foods that you're supposed to eat and things like that. So you would go to the presence of the Lord. You would go there. So it says here that when they went, whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed her womb, the rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. So, what you have to look at the correlation here. This all has to do, what they're describing here is going to worship, eating food as part of the sacrifice and part of the festival. And whenever they did that, Peninnah would bully Hannah. So it didn't say that Peninnah bullied Hannah when they were at home. It says that she bullied her when they went to go to the Lord. What's the connection there? Well, the connection is Peninnah was driving it home that the Lord was the one who wasn't giving Hannah children. It's the Lord's fault. So every time Hannah goes and to these festivals, she thinks that God doesn't like her. So it's in her face. She believes that the Lord loves Peninnah and is blessing Peninnah, the mean one, and that the Lord is not blessing her. Because why? Don't know. So, and I don't know who, Peninnah probably put that in her head. Now, we've already covered the fact that God is the one who gives people the ability to have children. He creates the being in your womb, obviously. So he's in control of who is born and who isn't. So Peninnah, it's just like the devil, I think. The devil takes the partial truth and then twists it and uses it to turn you against God, to give you a bad opinion of God. So Peninnah says, well, God is the one, and they know it's true. God's the one who closes or opens the womb. So then Peninnah, God doesn't love you. God loves me. Look at all my children. He doesn't love you. You're obviously doing something wrong. Otherwise, you'd be blessed with children the way I am. And then, so that's awful. So then Hannah believes that. Every single time. She's thinking to herself, I'm going here to worship a God who doesn't love me, who isn't blessing me, who doesn't like me, and who instead is giving children to this woman who's this jerk. And also, her husband isn't really that much of a help. Because he says, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? Couple problems with this. One is situational. Hannah could have answered, you love me. I love you. Why do you continually sleep with this other woman and give her children? You give me food. Thanks very much. But you don't. See, and it says all her sons and daughters. So he's done it repeatedly. It's not that he had, it's not, because you could see he married Hannah first. He probably married Hannah first. And then she wasn't having children. And so he married another wife to give him children so he'd have an inheritance, like to give to somebody so that his line would continue. And so she had sons and daughters. But he didn't stop, like with the one son, the one surviving son, or the two surviving sons, or the three surviving sons. He kept doing it so that there's a whole family there that he's built with Peninnah. It's kind of, I don't know if it's disingenuous. I don't know how you can love someone really and then keep sleeping with somebody else and giving them and impregnating them. I never did understand that with Jacob. I don't know. But so that in that situation, that wouldn't have made me feel better either, him saying that. Secondly, that reminds me of when you yourself are praying for something that's out of your reach, that you wish or want or deeply, deeply desire. You deeply desire it. And it's not an evil thing. It's a thing that you deeply desire. And then somebody else tells you, meaning well, that you just need to be content with what you have. Just practice gratitude. You just need to be grateful. It reminds you of like when you were a little kid and then you didn't like the food that you put out for you. And so she says, you need to eat that because there's starving people in China. It's like, well, give it to them then. Like, why do I care about a bunch of people I don't even know? Like when you're little, you're like, how is that relevant to me? What? That doesn't make me want to eat it. It doesn't make me want to eat it. Or to be grateful, it makes me annoyed. So I would actually give that as advice. If somebody is praying for something that looks impossible and they're praying for something and they deeply desire it, do not tell them, and it's making them unhappy, do not tell them just to be grateful or to go around counting their blessings, because that makes it worse. Like to say, don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? No. No, you don't. Stop sleeping with another wife. It's shallow sounding and unhelpful to say, well, you've got it so good. Think about it. You could be a paraplegic. Think about it. You could be, living in communism. Think about it. You could be an orphan. Yeah, I could be. What does that have to do with anything? So that's where Hannah's coming from. She has no one who understands her. And her husband's, whatever he's doing, feeding her a lot. I mean, she probably thinks, okay, do you want me to get fat? Like, why are you giving me all this food that I'm not going to eat? Because I'm so upset. Because how can you be happy? How can you be? See, because it goes deeper for her than, in the end, this is what the problem is. It is not her having children or not having children. What it is her deep distress at the concept that God doesn't love her. That she and God have a problem. That she and God are adversaries. That she wants something, God doesn't want her to have it. She can't understand why he doesn't want her to have it. And so she has an opinion of God that has been taught to her by someone who hates her. And also kind of reinforced by her husband, telling her to be content with what she has. So, and she's done this year after year after year. come. And it doesn't say that she's gone to worship or that she's gone to pray ever before. She's just cried and not eaten, and cried and didn't eat, and cry and won't eat, and cry and won't eat. And whatever is the matter, this time it has gotten, she can't stand it anymore. And it could be that it's after her husband said this. She just can't stand it anymore. And so she goes to confront God for the first time. And she, even a little bit of her opinion of him sneaks into her prayer, because she says, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant. Well, that's implying that he's not looking at you. He doesn't see your misery, that he has forgotten you. That's what she's saying. Stop forgetting me. Please look at me. Well, and then she says, but see, here I think is where the turning point is. And it's just a little step. And that's all she needed to do. It's a little step, but it's a big one for her. And what it is it's an expression of trust in defiance of everything she's been told by everybody else. Because all of society also is saying that she's barren because she's not being blessed because God has done this. God has done it. God has done it to you. So instead of the vow symbolizing, of giving the son, symbolizing total surrender and sacrifice of the thing she wants most, it is an expression of total trust. I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. Okay. I don't think there is another pure expression of trust than when a parent hands you their kid, like to babysit. You know that parent trusts you to take care of the most precious thing in their whole life. That child is the most precious thing that they have. And if they let you have the kid and then they leave, that's trust. And Hannah decided to express trust. Like, you don't just leave your child with anyone. You leave your child with a responsible, caring, loving, protective person. And so she was expressing to God in that offering that I'm willing to believe that you will take care of my child, that you are trustworthy to take care of what would be the most precious thing that I have ever had in my life. If, that's interesting. If you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, then. Then. So she was giving God a chance. She was saying, if you remember me, if you do this thing for me, then I will know that you can hear me, you did see me, you didn't forget me. Then I'll know I can trust you with my baby. And then Eli is like, what are you doing? Quit drinking. Kind of shows you the state of things at the time, that he was thinking that there might be drunken women hanging around the temple. I mean, the tabernacle. But she's like, no, which just proves you don't have to pray out loud either. And that God hears women's prayers. And you don't have to make a magical spectacle of it. And this is what's interesting too. He says, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you've asked him. And then she went away and ate something, and she wasn't sad anymore. Her face was no longer downcast. So there was nobody above the high priest but God. And he spoke with authority, even if he had stupid sons who were no good. He didn't even know what she prayed for. But he gave her the blessing. So that matters. That matters. And that held tremendous weight. So to her, that was as good as God saying, yes. And so from that moment, even though nothing had happened differently, the weight lifted off of her, and she went away and ate something and wasn't downcast anymore. So sometimes when God has answered your prayer, before anything happens in the physical, he gives you a sense, a feeling of peace that it will happen. And so you can stop crying and stop losing your appetite, and you can feel better because you're filled with something that doesn't make sense. But what it is it's a spiritual answer to your prayer, because it says, so in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. So Elkanah lay with Hannah, his wife, but it doesn't say, it might have been a few times. It might have taken a while. And I don't know actually how much he had been doing that, because maybe he had decided. But, it's very possible that Hannah talked to him about it. That he was like, where'd you go? Well, I was praying in the, really, what about? Well, this. And then the high priest came over and he told me that, may the Lord answer your prayer. And then maybe Elkanah was like, because he was a devoted man, clearly, but then he was like, well, okay, I got to do my part then. I'm willing. If this is what, if she prayed for this, So I'm not gonna, I'll participate. I got to, I'll go with this. So that's good. So that's good. The Lord put that on his heart that he needed to do his job here. And she had a baby. And then God didn't just give her one son. He gave her a bunch more kids. So I would also say that maybe God restored the marriage between her and Elkanah, because I can't imagine it was really that happy before. So he restored the marriage and then gave Hannah a bunch of children to keep. This prayer of rejoicing, finally, Hannah has a proper picture of God and his dominion over the world and how powerful he is. Because she had assumed that this was impossible. This is impossible. But then the picture she paints of God is just this vast being, the foundations of the earth are the Lord's, and he's on them. He has set the world. That's this huge thing, and she has a lot of these juxtapositions, like he does this and then this. It was like these whole list of sudden reversals. People who were full hired themselves out for food, but those who were hungry hunger no more. She who was barren has borne 7 children, but she who has a many son pines away. So it's just like, whew, like the way things are, and you think they're that way, suddenly flip. Suddenly. And the Lord is the one that does this. And then he lifts the needy from the ash heap, not just lifts them, but he sets them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. So he doesn't just, lift you up and put you in a slightly better situation. He glorifies you. He puts you in with royalty. And so that is what, because she prophesied that about how God doesn't just fulfill his promises, but he goes, above and beyond. She gets more children because, well, here's what I think. I think above all, God wants us to have a good opinion of him and relationship with us. And as soon as Hannah got it into her head that God was the one who was keeping her from having children, which may not have been true. Like, and not, and he might not have been purposely closing her womb. It just might not have been time yet. And then Peninnah put that poisonous thought in her mind. Well, as soon as that thought entered Hannah's head and she accepted that thought, well, then God was like, well, now I have to deal with this. Because the second that happened to Hannah, she withdrew from God. Like, he doesn't like me and I'm not going near him. You could tell all she did was cry. Whenever she neared the presence of the Lord, she cried and wouldn't eat. She felt rejected by God, even though he hadn't rejected her. He was waiting for her to come to him. That's all. She had never come to him before. He was like, well, in order to repair this, you have to come to me. In order for me to get this thought out of your head, this poisonous thought that some mean jerk put in your head, you have to come to me. Let's talk about this, you and me. And so for the longest time, she didn't do that. She wouldn't come. She wouldn't give him a chance. So he's like, well, I'm not gonna, I'm interested in the personal relationship between you and me, hon. So I'm going to wait. And I want you to come to me. Come on. And he put it in Elkanah's heart to come to be devoted and come 3 times a year relentlessly. And so he did. So it's a calling. Come. And so finally she broke down and she did it. She came and expressed trust. She gave him a chance. And he did not disappoint. She gave him a chance. He seized the chance. He gave her the child. She, of her own free will, dedicated him and gave him to the Lord. And then God, to further affirm her good opinion of him, gave more children, repaired the marriage. And we don't hear any more about Peninnah. Don't hear anything. Peninnah didn't get blessed by the high priest. Hannah got blessed every time they went up there. So, yeah, it said Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife, saying, so probably each time they went up, it's like, kids, so he poured out blessing upon her because she gave him a chance. She thought to herself, I've got nothing else. Nobody else can fix this. My husband can't fix it. I can't fix it. Nobody can fix this. Perhaps if I throw myself at God, it's my last hope. Because she could have just continued on being miserable for the rest of her life. I'm miserable. God hates me. My husband, I guess I'll just die. But she didn't. She came to God and she gave him a chance. He seized the chance. That's what I think the proper teaching of this story is. It is not that she was willing to sacrifice everything. And then finally God was like, yes. Now that I've put you through the thumb screws and the rack and the hot oil and the pull out your hair and all these tortures. Finally, when you scream, uncle, now finally I'll give you what you want. That's creepy. To me, it's that Hannah had to be willing to change her opinion of God. You have to have a good opinion of him. I believe that Paul talks about that, how Sarah finally because she didn't at first have a good opinion of God. But eventually she judged him God capable of fulfilling the promise to her. She came around and believed that and then received Isaac. So that's a confirmation of that if you have a good opinion, you have to have a good opinion of God before he will answer your prayer. And you don't have to have a perfectly good opinion because you don't know yet, but you have to give him a chance. You have to be willing to believe that he does love you. He will answer. And that you can trust him. And then when you get that, any kind of confirmation that yes, he's heard you, then you have to take a deep breath, go eat something, and don't let your face be downcast. If you really receive that, then believe it. Believe it. So that's that prayer for today. And if you have any questions about anything, leave them in the comments and be back later with another one.